Hey everybody, Jordan Rosenberg here of Bierman Law, and I am joined today for a few minutes with Michelle Trina, who is awesome. She is a previously divorced woman with a daughter now, and has created from her experience a one-woman comedy show called The Divorce Diaries, and brand new on Amazon Prime special as well. So that's extremely exciting. Congrats, Michelle.
I love
So
that.
as a starting point, kind of tell us about yourself a little bit and kind of your history and I mean, even about the divorce process for you.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jordan. I
Of
very much
course.
appreciate it. I have a special place in my heart for the divorce community in Chicago as we filmed the Divorce Diaries special, which you can see it on Amazon Prime Video now streaming. Yes, I'm going to plug it before we start. So, a little background about me. I've been an actor since high school, and then I pursued it in college. I toured with musical theater, Shakespeare, did improv, and then I got married. And, sometimes, I think you shift priorities to create a family, and I could have stayed doing that touring and actor's life, but I just decided to go into teaching theater and acting. And I also did acting on the side, so kind of swapped. But I fell in love with it. And then I also learned how to kind of perform and teach at the same time. It was a whole thing. So in that realm, right, my marriage started to hit a rock or a hard place, whatever you want to call it. I guess that is a rock and a hard place.
Would you be comfortable sharing with us at a time in your relationship that you thought to yourself, you're like, look, listen, I've committed to this guy, we have a child together, but it's over from my perspective. Was there a point in time that you experienced, or was it sort of degenerative?
Unfortunately, it was like 6 months into the marriage, and I didn't want to admit that. But I actually, and I should even say, going back further, it was probably before we got married. But this was my
Interesting.
first boyfriend, and I'm not saying that to put him down. I just know that there was a lot of red flags for the future of who I am, and how I could possibly guess my growth would be. So I did shift a lot about my personality to kind of fit into this relationship,
Yeah.
in my own doing, right? It was really not something he forced me to do, but there was just, our personalities, our spiritual senses were different. So when we got married, I got my master's degree, I got a new job, and we moved all within 2 months, and got married. So it was a very stressful
Yeah.
time. But then at the same time, we were okay for that first 6 months. Things started to take a downward spiral. I was teaching in a very urban area that was stressful and challenging, while at the same time very rewarding. And I lived for my students and the school and the community there. And my ex-husband felt a shift.
Yeah.
And there was definitely a shift. I felt I had started having feelings for my boss. I know it sounds very soap opera reality show, and my boss didn't know. But it was weird. It was getting odd, and things were happening inside me that I was like, what am I doing? What is going
Right.
on?
Yeah. Which
Yeah.
ultimately leads to, was there like a point? Was there like, did you see something and you're like, something clicked for me? I need this. I have to move on because a part of me just doesn't, this is not how I'm going to live the rest of my life.
Right. So then going into that world, that was a starting point of the issues that were arising. I could feel them. And then once my daughter was born, we definitely the growing apart and shift became massive.
Yeah.
And when I did realize this is when I'm going to make the move was I want to say it was shortly after my daughter's first birthday, maybe a couple months after. There was a big argument that his reaction was my trigger to tell him that I wanted a divorce, and I could only do it with the therapist there. So that was the exact moment in time, was when we had a major blowout, and his reaction, fueled by emotions, just led me to feel like this is not how I want to live the rest of my life.
Yep. And that's such a common scenario, which is why it's so cool talking to you, because it just that's so common in what I see as a practitioner with my clients. And like, look, you've sort of felt a certain way, you've had a gut feeling, maybe your friends along the way have told you and you just didn't want to hear it. And ultimately there's some event that happens and you're like, you know what, I'm in the mindset now, this is kind of what I have to do to move on. And especially when you have a really young daughter, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a situation there's so many questions that come from that. Is my daughter going to be okay? Am I going to be okay? Or, am I going to be able to see her every day? That's
Yeah.
hard.
And that was it was a hard decision, but it was after a couple of years of feeling this
Right.
like
Of
it was
course.
almost like a slow depression. And I don't like to say depression because I know that like I was never diagnosed with depression, but it feels depressive when when you're missing elements in your life and you long for feeling yourself again.
Yeah.
And then I started to create Divorce Diaries when I finally moved out of the house that we had bought together. When I moved in with my family again after, being gone for years, it was a moment where I felt like, okay, now I have to create from it because I that's where I felt I was always at home, was on stage. And I was excited to get back out there and work again on stage. And that's Divorce Diaries slowly evolved from that. Um, and
Had
then
you
it
been acting and doing things during your marriage, or was it
100%.
sort of suppressed and kind of reinvigorated afterwards?
So it was suppressed in the way that I really wanted to be doing what I'm doing now, which is acting full time, right? I mean, I still teach, but it's like acting's the forefront. And I had to suppress that because, you think, well, I'm married, I'm having a kid, I have to do this. So I never stopped performing, but it took me a while to get back to the road that I was on in my 20s when I
Right.
first met him. And it's
Well,
just like
yeah.
that's what happens.
Yep. And I
Um,
think that's a really important lesson, just for listeners, is like, even never let go of yourself, right? And that the one true passion you had, acting stuff, just at least if you're going to make compromises, don't compromise on those big things, right?
right. It's
So let me ask you about,
yeah.
so we're talking about your marriage, your relationship, and kind of that area. So tell us about, if you're comfortable again, the divorce process. Was
Yeah,
it
yeah.
contentious? Was it like, give us a flavor of like what was going on, and just how was it good? Was
Oh,
it bad?
yeah.
Was it amicable? Stuff like that.
The divorce process is best described as like one Thursday night out at, like, remember you're in college, you go out on Thursday night, you get really wasted. It
Oh
starts
yeah,
off really great and you get
sure.
drunk and you like go home with the love of your life and you make out and then you really hungover the next day. That's the divorce process.
Got
Because I
it.
feel like there's highs and lows and there's great things that happen during it. But then at the end of the day, you feel crappy in
Right,
the morning.
right.
But at the end, but in retrospect, with a divorce, the final day of when I signed my papers, I felt so relieved because it was over and we could both start on our path to our happiness again. Um, I will say that there was moments in my divorce I was so scared about filing for bankruptcy. My daughters had developmental delays that I was so scared, but I still knew that staying in the marriage was not the better option, which confirmed what I was on the right path. So
Right.
for me, the divorce process was like the yellow brick road.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you talk about the relationship between you and your lawyer? Are there things that the way he treated your case that you appreciated, or things that you didn't like, or things that even that you would advise people right now to
Yeah.
look out for?
There was one, I mean, he was always very kind. He worked with me with the fact that I had very little money to spare. We had a budget. I had did a payment plan afterwards after my retainer left. So that I really appreciated. Um, there was one thing that I think could have shifted, and the money that my ex-husband was supposed to pay me did not happen for a year later. And, I realized he should have put that in our PSA, a date,
Yeah.
or said, or the divorce couldn't be filed. Something should have happened where it was brought to my attention that the lawyer should have really handled that because it caused me a lot of stress for a year after I had to block my ex's family, one of his family members, because they were like, because it was becoming a war of if you don't pay the money, you're gonna get arrested kind of deal.
And that's so important. I mean, it's again something we see constantly is, even when I get cases from, when I inherit cases where somebody had a lawyer before, and I'm looking at these agreements, I mean, they drafting and making sure that everything you want and very specifically being incorporated there is so important, because these are ostensibly your Bibles.
So I'm glad you're saying that because that's what we did do for the first couple of years. Is really I always had to refer us back to the PSA. And in all honesty, I knew that it would be hard to have to file a motion and start all that stuff up again. So thankfully, my ex-husband and I are on very good terms, our scheduling but it did take a while to get there. It also took a while for me to learn different verbiage and being very objective as opposed to subjective. Like I spoke with a divorce attorney who helped me use the proper verbiage and not allow outside voices to trigger my buttons of wanting to react, because I react. I am a very reactive emotional being. It's what makes me a great comic and actor, but
Yep.
it's also what makes me a very loose cannon in situations that I can't control my emotions, which is my child, if he pushes the wrong button, you know?
I mean, Michelle, but also this is like that's normal, right? Like this is like your life, and if someone's messing with your life, of course you're going to have a reaction like that. So like something that I always tell my clients is like, look, you can only control what you can control, which is
Right.
how you react and setting your expectations. So get some advice, say the right words, speak business like, and just
Yeah.
make sure that you're staying objective in all of this.
It was hard to have to say thank you to him
Right.
for things that in your brain you're like, why am I thanking the parent of our child for things he should just be doing?
Right.
And I finally realized when I did do the things that the lawyer friend told me to do, it actually opened him up to doing, he's definitely been more open.
So let's talk about your show.
Yes.
It describes, I think, the idiosyncrasies of the divorce process, how you're feeling during the divorce, post divorce, and it's so cool. I mean, give us some of like the top three highlights where you get the best reaction of like things or issues that are just the funniest that you're like, nice, this one's going to crush it, and
Mhm.
everyone's going to laugh.
Co-parenting is one of the big ones where it's like I talk about, everybody thinks the co-parent, I get a lot of coaches or I hear the infomercials of, you know what, you really shouldn't argue with your co-parent because then they'll act out in school. I was like, right, because every single married couple that argues in front of their kid, the kid doesn't have any emotional damage because they're
Right.
married and in love. But if you're divorced, send them off to rehab
Oh
now.
God.
It's like,
Yeah.
and that's a big one. That gets a big reaction. The being a single mom on the playground at drop off, because I'm the one that's there in the other moms on the outskirt, the PTO, I call them the parent teacher organization, or what I like to call cult.
I always tell clients like, look, it's so important to have like a support system. And after the divorce, during the divorce, and even during your marriage, right? So look, I totally appreciate you spending some time with me today. And
Thank you for
again,
having me.
of course, and again, Michelle Trina, Divorce Diaries, one woman comedy show. She tours. She's on Amazon Prime. She's crushing it.
Thank you so much. Hope you'll watch
Absolutely,
the special, and thanks for having me.
absolutely. Watch her special.